Hello and welcome to this first recording in the new Azure Architect demo series. So in this first recording, I'll be showing you how to set up a lab virtual machine that we'll be using for the rest of the labs that we'll be doing. So we have a virtual machine that will be hosted in Azure, and the virtual machine will have this name. It will be a Windows 10 Pro 1803, and it's the machine that's going to contain all the software that we'll need to complete the steps of the different lab modules that we'll be doing in this series. So for the lab itself and the instructions contained in that, so if you go just in Google and you search for 20535A and you search for GitHub afterwards, so 20535A GitHub, and you search for that, you have one of the search results taking you to this Microsoft Learning GitHub page. And if you click on that, you have this instructions / labs, and that's the set of instructions that I'll be following. So for example, for module 02, we have the lab instructions there, and this is what we'll be following for that. So that being said, let's get right into it. So here are the steps of what we'll be doing today to prepare our lab virtual machine. So we need to deploy a VM, we need to add a data disk to the VM, we need to install this necessary software and with certain extensions on this machine. So let's go ahead and start with that. So if I go back to my Azure dashboard and I click on create a resource, what I want to do is I want to search for Windows 10 and I want to select the Windows 10 Pro version 1803. If I go ahead and select that and I go ahead and click on create, it's going to take me to the section where I can complete certain parameters for this virtual machine. For the name, I want to stick to the name that we have here. So the reason why I advocate doing that is that it makes it much easier to follow the lab instructions if you don't have to change names around too much. So I'll just stick with that name. So that's what I'll do. So if I go ahead and go here and type in 20535A SEA ARCH. For the username, if you look at the lab instruction or the lab instructions themselves, you notice that the assumed username is admin with this password. Unfortunately, Azure does not allow us to use a username called admin. So what I'll advise is that you put your initials in front of admin. In my own case, my initials are DO, so that will be DO admin. For the password, I won't advocate using this password as this machine will be accessed over the internet using RDP and a public IP address, and that password is just too simple. So I'll recommend you use something more complex than that. But what that means is that as you follow the lab instructions, be aware that whenever it says login with username admin and password this, you substitute that for your username and for your password. So if I go ahead and do that, so if I do your admin and password, for the resource group, I'm going to create a new resource group. I'll just call it the course code -rg. Select a location where you know that you have sufficient resources or the resource quota to be able to complete the deployment. I have my MSDN, so it's automatically selected that, so that's fine. I'll go ahead and click create for that. It's going to take me to the screen where I can select the VM size. So what I'll advise is that you use either D2SV3 or D4SV3. D4SV3 is what I'll use because I prefer to have something that's faster. And since I'll be shutting down this machine when I'm not doing the labs anyway, so it's not going to charge me the full amount. Or I'm not going to be charged this full amount per month because I'm going to be shutting it down when I'm not using it. But you can also use D2SV3. That will work for what we're going to be doing in this lab series. So if I go ahead and click D4SV3 in my own case, and I go ahead and click on select. For the settings page, I'll leave everything at the default except the select public inbound port option. I'll change that to HowDP because I need to be able to connect to this machine over HowDP. So I'll change that and set that to HowDP, but I'll leave everything else as default, and I'll go ahead and click OK. It's going to run some validation, and once the template is validated, I can go ahead and click on create. So that will take roughly, I think, about 6, 7, or 8 minutes, depending on how busy the Azure Fabric controller is in that region. But what I'll do is I'll pause this recording, and when that is completed, I'll come back and then we'll go through the rest of the process, which is we need to, if I go back, we need to add a data disk to this machine. And actually, because that's something that I could actually do while the machine is being created. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording first. When the virtual machine starts to be created, I'll come back and I'll go ahead and add data disk to the machine. See you in a few minutes. So welcome back. So that took roughly around 7 minutes. That's just 7 minutes 11 seconds to complete. So the next thing that I'll do is I'll go to the virtual machine and I'll select my virtual machine, and I'll go on the settings, and on the disks I'll select disks, and then if I click on add data disk, if I go ahead and click on the name and I click on create disk, I like sticking with the same naming convention, so that'll be 20535 A-SEA-ARCH data 01, because this will be a data disk. For resource group, I'll use my existing resource group where I put the virtual machine, so I'll do the same for this. I'll leave everything else at the default configuration with the exception of the size. So the size, I don't need a terabyte of data disk space. I need less than that. So I'll go ahead and change this to 100. So I'll remove the 3. I'll just leave that at 102, and I'll go ahead and click on create. So I'll pause the recording again. Once the disk has finished creation, I'll go ahead and save that, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the process. And the disk has completed, or the disk creation has completed now, so I'll go ahead and click on save. So I don't need to remain at the screen while it's saving the disk. What I can do is I can go back on the overview, and I can get the public IP address of my machine, bring up the remote desktop connection client, and put in the public IP there, and connect to my virtual machine. So for the username, don't forget to change that to more choices and go ahead and select other user. And I'll type in my username, which is doadmin, and the password that I configured. So if I go ahead and click OK to that, I can select the option not to ask me again and click on yes. So it will take a while for the machine to fully load all the components that it's going to need. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording and I'll come back once it's fully loaded. So welcome back. So the machine has now fully loaded, and what I'll do is I can click on where it says type here to search. And if I type in disk mgmt management.msc, that should bring up the disk management console. And if I click on that, it's going to take me to the disk management console. So I'll make that. So this is something that for some reason takes a while to load and detect the disk. So I'll leave this and I'll come back once it's finished. But just be aware, if you're at this stage, just be aware that you may need to wait for a lot of minutes, sometimes up to 10 minutes or even more. And don't panic and restart the machine and do all the stuff. Just relax and it's going to get there eventually. So I'll pause the recording, and once it's fully loaded, I'll be back and then we'll continue with the rest of the process. So welcome back. That took roughly around 12 minutes to complete. So but I can finally see the initialize disk menu here. I'll go ahead and leave that set to MBR and I'll click OK to that. So the disk will be initialized below, and what I can do is I can create a new simple volume on the disk. So I'll leave that set to the default. I'll assign this to drive letter F. So the reason why this is important is when we're following the instructions for the lab, as we saw on GitHub, there are certain instructions that's going to assume certain locations and certain names. It makes it easier for us if we stick to those names, so we don't have to change names all the time. So for example, it's going to assume that we have a volume called with the drive letter F, and the label is all files. So that's exactly what we'll use. We'll give the drive letter to be F, and we'll call the label all files, and then we'll transfer these files to that, which we'll get to. So going back, I'll leave that as F next, and I'll change the label to all files. And I'll go ahead and click next to that, and I'll go ahead and click finish. So it should format the disk, and that's done. So it's formatted the disk and that's completed. If I bring up File Explorer and I go under this PC, I should see a new volume called F with label all files. If I double click on that, I can see it's empty. So it's currently empty, but we need to move certain files to that. So the files that we'll be doing to that is if I bring up Edge from within the virtual machine now. So most of the things that I'll be doing will be doing from within the virtual machine now. So if I just search for 20535A GitHub and I press enter, it shows me that result again if I click on that. So what I can do is going down on the initial page, I have this option where it says download latest student handbook and all files content. So if I right click on that and open that in a new tab, and you can see the different releases here, and you can see that's the latest release. So what I want to do is I want to download this all files version 1.2.0.zip. If I click on that and I click on saved, download that. So it saved that. I go ahead and open the folder to see the file that I downloaded. If I right click and extract it to the same location, and you can see the content of this folder. If I copy all the content like that, if I go under this PC under all files and if I paste this content there, so that's what we need to do. So when we've done this, we are completed with this step. So now we can move on to the next step where we begin to install certain software and extensions on the machine. The first one being Visual Studio Code. So going back to the machine, going back to the browser, if I type in Visual Studio Code download, and you have the first link to download Visual Studio Code, and we want for Windows 10, so I'll go ahead and click on download there. It's going to begin to download. I can go ahead and click on run, and it's going to download and execute the installer. So if I go ahead and click on next and I accept and I click next, next, I can create a desktop icon. I can say register to use it as the editor for supported file types. And if I go ahead and click next to that, actually, you know what? I'll add these also. Add open with code action to Windows Explorer file context menu. So if I go ahead and click next and I click install, that should begin to install Visual Studio Code on this machine. So the other thing that we want to do after Visual Studio Code has finished installing is we want to install certain extensions into Visual Studio Code. So I'll go get the pages for those extensions. So the extension that I need, if I type in Azure Resource Manager Tools extension, and don't worry, I'll give the links and the steps to this in the description below, or I can do that in a blog post also. So, but you'll find all the steps. I'll post that somewhere. So, Azure Resource Manager tools. If I put Visual Studio extension, so Azure Resource Manager tools, Visual Studio extension. So that takes me to the Visual Studio Marketplace. And while that's loading, you can see Visual Studio is completely installed. So I can go ahead and click finish. It's going to launch it. I can right click on this and pin it to the taskbar. So right click on, let's close the, right click on Visual Studio Code and pin it to the taskbar because we'll use it a lot. So I have this Azure Resource Manager Tools Visual Studio extension, and if I go ahead and click install, it's going to try to open Visual Studio Code. That's fine, and I'll go ahead and click continue. And I go ahead and click yes, and it's going to bring up my Visual Studio Code, and I have this message here that says, will I like to install the Azure Resource Manager Tools extension? If I click on install, it's going to begin to install that. So you can see it installing there. So while that is installing, there's another one that we need. So if I go ahead and search for so the Visual Studio Marketplace, if I go ahead and search for Azure CLI Visual Studio Code extension, and we have the Azure CLI tools. So if I click on that, and we'll do the install also. I'll just verify that that has finished installing, so that's fine. If I go ahead and click reload, it's going to reload with the extension, so that's fine. We're all good. So the next thing that I'll do, if I go back and I'll click install for Azure CLI tools. Again, the same process, click yes. It's going to come up with a message to say, do I want to install the tools extension? I click install, and it's going to begin the installation. And I can click on reload when it's finished, and now we are set with that. So we can move to the next software that we need to install, which is Azure PowerShell. So to install Azure PowerShell, we'll be using PowerShell to do the installation. So what I can do is if I click on type here to search and search for PowerShell. If I right click and run as administrator. So that brings up PowerShell. I'll just change the font to make it larger for you to see what's going on. Yep. So I have that. I have PowerShell open now. So we'll be installing Azure PowerShell using something called PowerShell Get. So which is because we've installed this machine on Azure, there's PowerShell Get already on this machine. So what I'll do to install Azure PowerShell is if I type in the command install module Azure RM hyphen allow clubber. So it will respond. Yeah, there we go. Allow clubber. So install hyphen module Azure RM space hyphen allow clubber. And if I go ahead and run that, and what it's going to do is it's going to reach out to the repo, to PowerShell gallery repo, and it's going to download the Azure RM modules and it's going to install them. So you can see it says, do I want to go ahead? If I click yes, enter, and it's going to give me another prompt again. It's going to say, are you sure you want to install? It's going to be installing from the PowerShell gallery as I mentioned. I can go ahead and type A to select yes to all and press enter. And once I've confirmed that, it's going to start the the installation very soon. So it started the installation now, so we're good. So what I'll also do is PowerShell is something we'll be using a lot, so I'll go ahead and right click on it here and I'll pin it to the taskbar. While Azure PowerShell is being installed, I can move on to the next one that we need to install, which is Azure CLI. So let's go back to our virtual machine, go back to the browser, and I'll type Azure CLI download, and I'll press enter to that. And I have this document install Azure CLI 2.0 Microsoft Docs. So if I go ahead and click on that, and I have the link here to install on Windows. So if I click on that, and here I can download an MSI installer. Go ahead and click on download, and I'll go ahead and click on run. So this is one of the ones that I can do in parallel. So the smart screen can be reached right now. That's okay. I'll go ahead and click on run. And I can see that it's prompting me to accept the license agreement. I accept. I click on install, and then it's going to begin the installation of Azure CLI. So Azure PowerShell has finished installing. Azure CLI is currently being installed. So that's not going to take so long. Once that finishes installing, what we need to do, which I'll go ahead, so the next one is we need to download and install Azure Storage Explorer. So again, going back to our virtual machine, going back to the browser tab, I can go ahead and search for Azure Storage Explorer download. And I have this link here that says Azure Storage Explorer, Cloud Storage Management. If I go ahead and click on that, I can see here where I can select my operating system and download Storage Explorer for free. So I'll just ensure that this finishes before I start another installation to avoid a conflict. So this should not take much longer to install Azure CLI. It's getting close. We're almost there. Okay, while it's doing that, if I go ahead, actually, that's done now. So if I go ahead and click finish and then download Storage Explorer for free, and I'll just go ahead and click on run. It's going to download it temporarily and it's going to execute it. So again, I'll click on run and it's going to start this. I'll go ahead and accept the license agreement and click on install or click on next, next, and it's going to begin the installation of Azure Storage Explorer. So while it's doing that, I can move on to the next step. The next step being install the Windows subsystem for Linux on our Windows 10 machine. So this one you have to follow closely. So to do this, number one thing that we need to do is we need to enable a Windows feature for Windows system or Windows subsystem for Linux. To do that, I can click on type here to search and search for control panel. In control panel, I can go on the programs and I can go on the programs and features, and I have this option to the left that says turn Windows features on or off. If I select that option and if I scroll down, I have one of this option here that says Windows subsystem for Linux, and that's currently disabled. So if I go ahead and select that to enable it and go ahead and click OK to that, so it's going to enable that Windows feature. So while it's doing that, you can see Storage Explorer has finished installing. If I go ahead and click finish to that. So the reason, by the way, why I want to open Storage Explorer is I want to pin it to the taskbar also, so I don't go looking for it all the time. So all the tools I will be using, I'm pinning them to the taskbar. So Storage Explorer, I'll go ahead and click pin to taskbar. And really that's all I need, because the feature that I just added for Windows Subsystem for Linux wants to restart the machine. So I'll go ahead and allow it to restart the machine. So what I'll do here is I'll go ahead and say to this, I'll say restart now. So it's going to restart the machine. And once we come back, I'm going to add a Linux distribution on my Windows 10, and then we're done with this setup of our lab machine. So what I'll do is I'll pause the recording now, and when we're back, we'll do the final step of step 3E, and then we're done. So see you in a few minutes. Hello and welcome back. So the machine has now restarted after I enabled the Windows subsystem for Linux. What happens is if I bring up PowerShell now, and if I type in bash, I just want to use this to show you what would happen without having a Linux distribution installed. So if I type in bash and I press enter, it's going to tell me, yes, you have Windows subsystem for Linux enabled, but you have no installed Linux distribution. So it said for me to install the distribution, I can visit the Microsoft Store, and it gave me a URL there. So what I do is I copy this URL, I bring up a web browser, Microsoft Edge, and then I can paste that URL in there. So if I go ahead and do paste and go, and it opens the Microsoft Store automatically, and it opens the Run Linux on Windows menu. So I can select a distribution here. So I'll go ahead and select Ubuntu in my case, and I'll go ahead and click on Get. So when I click on Get, it's going to start the download of the Ubuntu distribution that's going to be installed on my Windows. It's going to start the download. That should not take too long. But the thing is, once this is completed, we'll have the Ubuntu, we'll be able to use Ubuntu on Windows, which we'll need for that. So it says Ubuntu just got installed. If I go ahead and click launch, so the reason why I'm clicking launch again is I want to bookmark this. So I click launch, you can see it's saying installing. This may take a few minutes. So I'll actually pause the recording here and then come back once it prompts me to put in the password, because it's going to do that. If I go under properties, I'll just make the font larger for us. But I'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, welcome back again. So now it's prompting me for the new Unix username. I'll just go ahead and use the same username that I used, which is my initials followed by admin, and I'll press enter to that. It's going to hack me for a password. I'll go ahead and use the same password, and I'll verify the password. And now it says installation successful, and now I have this. What I can do is I can right click on this and pin it to the taskbar also, so that whenever I need to use this, whenever the instruction says to use this, I can just click on that and it's going to open for me. Of course, I can always go to PowerShell also or command line, and I could just use bash, and in this case it's just going to sign me in and I'm going to connect to that. So that's it for this particular recording. So I hope that's been very clear to you. So what I'll do again is I'll put the notes to the steps and the links somewhere. You find that in the description of the window below, so that could link you to my blog azurehangout.com. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you in the very next recording in this series, where we start the demonstration for the labs, which would be lab number 2 in this case. So that's lab number 2 that we'll be starting with, module number 2. And that will be talking about deploying resources with Azure Resource Manager. So I'll see you in the next recording. Bye for now.